Hi, everybody. I realize I need to put one more screencast into our lineup for this Unit 9. And this one is going to be the information. This is included on your Unit 9 test next week. And, this is about environmental legislation, and I've been putting it off to the end. I knew that from the very beginning. I wasn't sure if I was going to include it on the test, but I realized I pretty much have to do it. Otherwise, I think I'm doing you a disservice. And here's the thing. I've been trained my whole career to try to not put students in a situation where they have to memorize stuff. But the reality is, in some cases, you just need to memorize stuff. If you're going to be a lawyer, if you're going to be a doctor, you're going to have to memorize stuff. And so on this test here, if there's a few things to memorize, including environmental legislation. So I'm going to try to give you some tricks for how to remember them. All right, ready to go? So basically, on the APES test, there's 10 pieces of environmental legislation. There used to be a lot more, so don't complain, okay? But here's a list of them. I'll let you look through the screencast later for doing. We're going to go through each of these ones in turn, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of a rundown on it and a little trick for maybe how to remember it, what the highlights are, and I'm going to give you a link to some Quizlets. Okay, we'll start with the Clean Air Act. So just remember, it's about air. That's easy enough, right? So the Clean Air Act, basically, what it did is it was a U.S. law. Most of these are U.S. laws, and it basically sets standards, national ambient air quality standards, NAAQSs. And basically, remember we were studying particulate matter, and we're studying air pollution. All those things that are you get when you look at an app for air quality. That's basically it. Established standards for all these, primarily for emissions from cars and factories. And it basically authorized the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to monitor compliance to this. So, and it's considered to be one of the most effective laws ever passed in terms of bringing about real environmental change. And you know what? If you go to the United States, you probably notice the air quality there is really good, and it's because of this act and the ability of having this Environmental Protection Agency authorized to enforce it. Now, the Clean Water Act, here's the thing to remember about the Clean Water Act. It's really about fishing and swimming and recreating in the water. So basically, in 1969, the Cuyahoga River of Ohio caught on fire. And people were like, whoa, water's not supposed to catch on fire. We need to do something about this. And so the idea was it was just criminal how degraded our natural waters had become. And so the United States passed a law saying, look, we're going to protect rivers, lakes, and wetlands from pollution. It's not about drinking water, though. It's about outdoor waters. And the idea is we're supposed to keep them fishable and swimmable, a place where you'd want to go and recreate. And the main thing is, it says you can't have point source pollution. You can't have a pipe that's dumping things in here, right? So, and it says and if you're going to dump materials into a river, lake, or waterway, you have to get permission to do it, and you have to apply what's called the best practicable technology to reduce the impact of that effluent on the water system in which you're dropping it. It also importantly provided funds to establish and build sewage treatment facilities all around the United States. But one thing to keep in mind is it does not have anything to do with groundwater. It's only about surface waters, and it's not about drinking. It's about making sure that this recreational water is usable and clean. Drinking comes down to the Drinking Water Act. Hello. So if it has to do with human consumption, if it has to do with polluting humans, hurting humans, that's the Safe Drinking Water Act. That's not the Clean Water Act. It'd be easy to confuse those two. So this is really designed to protect public health by making sure that the water that we're consuming is not going to hurt us. So basically, it established protections from bodies of water like reservoirs, lakes, rivers, where people are going to be taking water in. So you couldn't have high levels of pollutants that could hurt people in these bodies of water. It also and it regulates the level of pollution in both surface water and in groundwater. So this is one that deals with groundwater. And the most important thing is it authorizes the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA of the United States, to set standards for these pollutant levels, to monitor these pollutant levels, and to enforce compliance with these. So it has teeth behind it, right? It doesn't just set goals. It gives this agency, the EPA, the authority to punish people who break these rules and to determine what is necessary in order to protect the health of people when it comes to the water that they're going to consume. Now, this one's pronounced CERCLA, okay? Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. You know what? Don't even bother. Just remember CERCLA. Now, CERCLA, here's what you want to do. Okay, so it'd be really easy to confuse here. Maybe this will work for you, maybe it won't. I'm going to suggest that if you learn to say this as CERCLA, just think CERCLA Superfund. That's what it's about. CERCLA established the Superfund. Now, the Superfund basically is this: it's a pot of money that anyone who's going to manufacture, or somehow, I think it's mainly manufacturers. If you're going to manufacture hazardous wastes, hazardous chemicals that will eventually become hazardous waste, then you have to pay, even if you haven't polluted at all. If you're going to make this stuff and we know that it's a hazardous substance, you have to pay into this fund. And then the super fund that everyone's paying into is like taxes, right? It's taxes for making, harmful substances. Then the U.S. government, the EPA, is going to take money out of this fund to go to these sites that we found that are abandoned toxic waste dumps. So like, we don't know who's supposed to pay for it. The person, the company's gone, there's nobody to sue. And we've got all this gross stuff leaking into the toxic waste leaking out of barrels, getting in the groundwater. It costs a lot of money. That's what my wife did for the first few years of her career. And so basically it provides money for that by taxing people, by making them pay into this super fund. Let's see. Anything else you need to know about it? I don't think. Well, basically, also it tells the EPA that they have the authority to investigate a spill, a leak, groundwater contamination, and to try to figure out who's responsible for it and make them pay for it. So it doesn't require that it comes out of the super fund. If we know who's responsible for it, they have to pay for it. If we don't, that's when we go to the super fund. This one we call it RCRA. Okay, it's the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, but everyone just calls it RCRA. Again, that's what my wife dealt with. Here's the thing I would say about RCRA is the cradle to grave law. Okay, that's the one thing you got to know about it. And look, it has CRA in it. Get it? Cradle. If you can just remember that, you got this. Okay. So the cradle to grave law, basically what it says is the EPA, again, look at how much power they have. Okay. It says they get to regulate these hazardous substances from their cradle to their grave. In other words, from the manufacturing of it, to the transportation of it, to the use of it in industry or farming or whatever, to its ultimate storage afterwards as waste. So this entire process, from the beginning to the end, from cradle to the grave, you have to keep meticulous details of how much of it you have, how it was kept, anything that might have happened to it. So it requires this accounting of hazardous materials from production through ultimate storage as waste. All right. And the main thing is that it requires that you keep these accurate records so we can figure out what went wrong when something does go wrong. The Delaney Clause of the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. Now, this is an old one. Okay, well, this basically, and you don't need to know the dates. I'm just going to say, this is actually an old law from the 1930s that then had a clause added to it, an amendment added to it in 1958. Now, here's what you're going to remember about this. This is about cancer. This basically what this says is the Food and Drug Administration, so not the EPA in this case, but the Food and Drug Administration, it allows them to ban the use of any kind of additive to a food that might cause harm to humans, specifically carcinogens, things that might cause cancer in either humans or animals. So the way I remember it is Delaney, look at this, Delaney, died of cancer. Okay, Delaney died of cancer. That's how I remember it, okay? It's all about making sure that anything we put into foods is, quote, generally recognized as safe, meaning it does not cause cancer. And without this, trust me, manufacturers would put stuff in there that would kill you, but this kept them from doing that. And then there's the Montreal Protocol. Okay, now we just talked about this in this unit is right here. Okay, so the Montreal Protocol, it's about ozone depleting substances. So basically, this one is not a U.S. law. This is an international agreement. There's only a couple on the AP test that are international agreements. This is one of them. So basically, the whole purpose of this is to get the world to agree to stop the manufacturing and use of these ozone depleting substances, specifically chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, halons, which are fire retardants, and carbon tetrafluorides, which are often used as cleaning products. Okay, and now here's the thing about this one is it's looked at as the most successful international environmental agreement of all time. It actually worked, and we talked about that before, right? So every member of the UN signed on to it. And it worked. We've actually been able to reverse this. So the Montreal Protocol was pretty important. Now, how are you going to remember that this is about ozone? I just sort of like to see O in ozone. I don't know. Okay. Good luck with this one, but you got to know Montreal Protocol is about ozone. Okay. Now, not to be confused with the Kyoto Protocol. Now, the Kyoto Protocol, people were hoping would be as successful as the Montreal Protocol, but it wasn't. Okay. The Kyoto Protocol is about carbon dioxide, okay, and other greenhouse gases. So, Kyoto, carbon dioxide, I don't know, they sound sort of the same. Basically, again, it's this international agreement to try to curb the emissions of greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide. Now, here's the thing about it, though, is that it said, look, countries are going to agree to certain goals certain goals to meet to reduce them, and they weren't that aggressive. It wasn't nearly as aggressive as it should have been. But basically, you're going to agree to hold yourself accountable to reaching these um, goals of reducing your emissions, right? But here's the thing. It said, look, this is going to have an economic impact, right? And so we're not going to put an impediment to these poorer countries. So really what it said was like, if you're a poor country, we're giving you a break. But the flip side of that is, well, if you're a developed country, you have more onus on you to change, right? And as a result of that, the conservative factions in the United States said, well, then we're not going to sign it. So like one of the world's biggest, at the time, the world's biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions was the United States, and they didn't sign on. And so this one has not been nearly as successful, but it's a start. And there's been follow-ups, but this is the one you need to know about. Okay, again, in this unit, we talked about the Endangered Species Act. It's pretty easy to understand what this is about. It's about endangered species. It's about trying to prevent extinction. It's a U.S. law. And what it did is it basically established a criteria for saying what constitutes an endangered species and what constitutes a threatened species, and what constitutes a vulnerable species. And it puts the survival of the species ahead of any economic or commercial concerns. It says like the main thing we had to do is we had to protect this species from extinction. Now in this case, instead of it being the Environmental Protection Agency, it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And it basically says you have to establish regulations and restrictions on commercial and recreational activities that could impact a species once it has been identified as an endangered species or a vulnerable species or a threatened species. And furthermore, it says, and Fish and Wildlife Service, you have to come up with and oversee the enactment of recovery plans for these protected species. Now that can mean like establishing wildlife corridors, setting aside forest, roadless areas, whatever it takes. And it also involves basically putting the burden not just on the federal government, but also on commercial interests as well. And so there's a lot of pushback on this, but it's been very successful at protecting species. And then there's CITES. That's how you pronounce this one, CITES, okay? I had to look it up on Google because I wasn't really sure. All right, so the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Again, we just talked about this in this unit, but the main thing is this is yet another international agreement. So I think we have three of them, right? We have Montreal, we have Kyoto, and we have CITES, okay? And CITES is all about, again, protecting species from extinction. But in this case, we're doing it by regulating the international trade in both living specimens of these species or products derived from them. So think like ivory, rhinoceros horns, things like that. So we're saying, or bird species that people like, like endangered birds from the Amazon. So it says is, like people are poaching these animals in poorer countries and selling them for profit to richer countries. So we're just going to stop that. We're going to say you can't trade in these, and that will make it so that these people in Africa aren't going to hunt elephants. They're not going to hunt rhinos. These people in Central America aren't going to trap parrots. That's the idea behind it. Mixed results, but that's what it's for. Okay, it's supposed to keep a species from going extinct by getting countries to agree not to participate in the trade of these organisms or things derived from these organisms. And if you are going to allow these things to be traded, it has to be done in a biologically sustainable way. Okay, so that's the 10 you have to know. It's not that hard, to be honest, people. Okay, now. I'm gonna hold you accountable by putting them on the Unit 9 test, because otherwise I think you'll just blow it off, and then it's going to come back and sting you on the test. So I put together a Quizlet here. Yeah, it's not the best, but this Quizlet might help you just cycle through it. But honestly, I really think you can do this. So good luck with it. Sorry to drop this on you, but I'm dropping it on you. Bye, guys.